I had been thinking for years about a story about a shark that attacks people and what would happen if it came in and wouldn't go away, and I hadn't done anything with it really. And then in 1964 I read a story about a shark fisherman off Long Island who caught a 4,550-pound great white shark off the beaches of Long Island. And I thought, wow, what would happen if one of these things came in and wouldn't go away? And again, I didn't do anything about it until 1970 or 71, when a publisher finally said, that's an interesting story, I'll pay you a couple of dollars if you'll put it on paper. So that's how the idea began. One of the many accidents that happened with Jaws was the title. We had no idea of the title. I had thought for months about titles. I probably had 100. Some of them were pretentious: A Stillness in the Water, A Silence in the Deep, Leviathan Rising. A lot of them were Françoise Sagan titles, you know, terribly pretentious and very personal. There were the Jaws of Death and the Jaws of Leviathan, and they all sounded dramatic or melodramatic or weird or pretentious. And we came up to 20 minutes before production, and my editor and I were having lunch at a restaurant called the Dallas Cowboy in New York. And I said to him, look, this was Tom Congdon, we cannot agree on a word that we like, let alone a title that we like. In fact, the only word that we even think means anything, that says anything, is Jaws. Call the book Jaws. And he said, what does it mean? I said, I don't know, but it's short, it fits on a jacket, and it may work. He said, okay, we'll call the thing Jaws. At first, nobody knew what they had here, including myself. It was a first novel. It was a first novel about a fish, and it really had no great prospects. But Tom Congdon, the editor at Doubleday, sensed that there was more here than just a first novel or a first novel about a fish. So it was sent out to the Book of the Month Club and the Literary Guild and Bandom and other paperback houses. And the first response was from the Book of the Month Club, which made it an A book, which means that it is selected for a main selection, or it is in the running for a main selection. And suddenly people began to think, whoops, we may have something more here than just a first novel, which nobody will read, and a first novel about a fish, which who cares less. So then the Reader's Digest selected it as a selection, and the Book of the Month Club made it an A book, main selection, and then Bantam bought it for what was then an enormous sum of money, $575,000. And then it went out to the movie auctions. And in those days, we're now talking many, many, many years ago, it went to Zanuck and Brown at Universal for $150,000. Which was, to me, the moon. I had no money at all. I had, in the bank, $300.
Both Dick Zanuck and I saw or heard about the book at identical times. I heard about it from a small card in the fiction department of Cosmopolitan, edited by my wife, Helen Gurley Brown, which gave a brief description of the plot of this novel by Peter Benchley, and then said, might make a good movie.
We both read it overnight, got on the phone with each other the next morning and said, look, we don't know how we can possibly do it, but we decided we must have this. Whatever it takes, this is the most exciting thing we've ever read, and we'll figure out later how we can make it.
Had we read it twice, in my opinion, we never would have made Jaws, because anybody with a modicum of production knowledge would know there was no way to get a shark, I said, get a shark to leap on the stern of a small boat and swallow a man. How are we going to do this? Were we going to do it in animation? Who was going to do this? We never thought about it. We just loved the book. We thought it would make a very good movie.
And the deal was subject to a meeting with Mr. Benchley, who we'd never met before, actually. And the agency also very much wanted us to tie a director of theirs, one of their clients, into this whole package. And so we had agreed to, I'm not going to mention this person's name because this is not a flattering story, but we had agreed in our anxiety to secure the rights to the book to put on this person as a director.
There was a director, and I really don't remember who it was, who kept saying, I've always wanted to make a movie about a whale. and at the end of it, Zanuck said, that's the end of that.
When the director who was going to direct a whale was vanquished from our sight, and here was Steven Spielberg director, filmmaker, Sugarland Express, right within sight of us. Stephen actually, and there are many versions of this, Stephen will tell you his, probably the true one.
I just remember seeing a very large, a block of pages that said Jaws on it, and I didn't know what that meant. Jaws, was it Jaws? Was it like about a dentist? Was this, was it because Jaws did not have it was not in the national consciousness at the time. It was just a word. It was kind of an unusual word, and I remember borrowing a copy to read over the weekend and discovering, with completely uninformed, not knowing, that it was a book about a great white shark, a predator, off a beach in a kind of Cape Cod-esque town. I had no idea this was about to become one of the best-selling books in the nation, and I read it, and I suddenly said to myself, "Wow, this is just like a movie I just made about a truck and a hapless driver called Duel." And of course, I'm young and I'm stupid and I'm saying, Duel, gee, that has 4 words. Duel has 4 letters and Jaws has 4 letters. And they're both about these leviathans preying upon every man, and I saw such a comparison between the Duel, which I had done previous to Sugarland Express, and Jaws, and I said to myself, this is kind of the sequel to Duel, only it's on the water. And I got very interested in it, and because coincidentally the producers of Jaws had just been my producers on my first feature, Sugarland Express, Dick Zanuck and David Brown, I asked them if this was something I could direct next.
The first thing Dick Zanuck and David Brown said to me is, we want to get rid of the backstories, we want to make this an A to Z adventure story. We do not want to have any of that involvement with a romance between Hooper and Mrs. Brody. We don't want to talk about the mafia. We don't want to talk about anything like that. We want to make this a straight-line adventure story.
Peter Benchley did a very good adaptation of his own novel. And then Peter kind of turned it over to me and said, here it is, and do with it what you want. And at that point, I didn't quite know what to do with it because it wasn't the movie I wanted to make next. And I quite didn't know the movie I wanted to make from the novel Jaws, except I knew about the 3rd act. I knew about the 1st act. I just didn't know about the 2nd act, which was going to be about a 60-page 2nd act. And David Brown suggested, and Dick Zanuck both suggested, that I go to Howard Sackler, who had written The Great White Hope.
We went from Peter Benchley to a writer by the name of Howard Sackler, who was a Pulitzer Prize winning playwright who wrote The Great White Hope. And he had been working on something else for us. And he also was an expert scuba diver and scuba dived all around the world, was very familiar, as is Benchley, by the way, great diver, very familiar with sharks and underwater activity.
Howard Sackler specifically asked not to have credit. He only had a limited time to give to the film, and therefore he said, I don't want credit. But he was, I think, Spielberg would say he was very important in that terrible phrase of motion picture making. He broke the back of the story.
Sackler really broke the back of the movie and got me to say, yes, I'll make this movie next. I'm committing.
And then came something that has not been recorded in the history of Jaws. The Screen Actors Guild contract was about to expire at the end of June of that year. It could have been 1973, perhaps, whenever the year was. And the studio decreed that no movie would be started that could not be finished by June 30th of that year, because they didn't want to be struck. That is, that photography was completed. Steven Spielberg, Richard Zanuck, and I met at the Bel Air Hotel, and Steven said, I don't have a script yet. You're asking me to start this movie in April, whenever it was. I don't know, maybe this was February. He said, I don't have a script. And I said, who can we get? He said, there's a man named Carl Gottlieb. I'm thinking about him in the movie.
I was hired first as an actor because if I was going to be on the set, I could at least help in the improvisations and the crowd scenes and finding stuff to do in the moment, which had been my job on stage at the committee as an improviser. And in fact, some of the best lines in the film are improvised by the actors, you know, based on their characters in the script. When you do a straight-line adventure film like Jaws, anything that doesn't contribute to the suspense or the humanity or the horror has to go. I said that we have a chance to make a movie that's going to do for the ocean what the shower scene did to Psycho in terms of affecting a generation with kind of a fear of the water. And to this day, when people come up to me and learn that I've worked on the screenplay of Jaws and talk to me about it, inevitably the first thing they say is, you know, that whole summer I didn't go swimming, or I've been afraid of the water ever since that movie, or I'm always thinking of sharks when I go swimming. In Hawaii, I don't go swimming at all. I hear that to this day. So surprisingly enough, that was my first reaction to the script and the story, and it's the thing that appears to have carried through and is one of the overwhelming impressions that we made. It's, you know, become popular culture.
I wanted to introduce Quint not in his boat laughing at all the yahoos on shore, and that one little visual where the orca goes by with Quint laughing and chuckling at the tiger shark that obviously isn't the predator that's been killing all the people in the vicinity. I had this other thing that I'd written in my script, because as you recall, I wrote an entire script of Jaws after Benchley and before Sackler, and this was one of the scenes that I had written, that Robert Shaw or that Quint is in a movie theater watching Moby Dick on the island of Amity at the local movie house, and he's laughing all the way through it. He can't stop laughing. It's so silly, the mechanical white whale, Ahab with his big harpoon, stabbing the whale as he's lashed to the belly, and the whale sounding and coming up again, and he's still, you know, this little mechanical figure is, you know, still sticking the little mechanical harpoon in the whale. And I just had Quint laughing hysterically, laughing so hard and so sort of maliciously that people get up and start leaving the theater until he's all alone in the theater, and his laughter can be heard right down the street. And that was in my script. But in trying to get the rights to Moby Dick, which Gregory Peck controlled, Greg wasn't opposed to the use of that scene that way in Jaws. He just claimed that he wasn't really proud of Moby Dick. It was not the proudest moment, you know, in his body of work, and just didn't really want us to either make fun of it or just include it at all in the movie, so we could never get the rights to use Moby Dick. I had this idea that there's a harbor master, and he's in his little shack, and there's all these sailboats. It's night, and there's about 20 sailboats with just their masts sticking up. One mast starts to go like this, and then the ship next to it, that mast goes like this, and then the third mast goes like this, and the fourth, until all of a sudden you see in sequential order, something is traveling beneath the keels. As the harbor master goes down to clean out his coffee pot in the harbor, and as he gets down there to clean out his coffee pot, he of course is taken by the shark. And that was a scene that was in my original script. In its place, I wrote this other scene, which was also in my original script, that slid over to this one, which is the pier. The two fishermen who take the Sunday pot roast and a huge chain and a large Texas Chainsaw Massacre style hook and toss it into the current, and the tide takes it out, and of course the shark takes the bait and the pier comes right off. The guy comes off the pier. The reason I wanted the scene in the movie was for one shot. Not seeing the shark was important to me because it was scarier, in my opinion, seeing the pier going off, stopping, and turning, and the pier itself coming back for the swimmer.
Charlie, take my word for it! Don't look back! Swim, Charlie! Swim!
I've heard that Stephen wanted to have the old couple from Sugarland Express, whose car was stolen, turn up in their car in Amity.
What's the story?
The missus and I just had our car taken by an ex-con. Claim he's a working man.
Was it a green Buick?
Seafoam Green 1956.
Roadmaster DOW 404.
Stole!
Is your name Alvin T. Knocker of New Frankfurt?
Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Now you're talking. Yes,
you
sir.
just stay put.
I wanted them to be passing through Amity, You know, maybe even going out to the beach and spreading out a picnic blanket, even fantasizing and saying, perhaps Mr. Knocker blows up an inner tube, and we get the idea that maybe he's going to go out in the water with his wife. And I thought, you know, this movie's too hard to make. I've got to stop making it harder on myself.
We thought that to legitimize the movie, there should be some real shark footage in the picture.
Ron and Valerie Taylor were engaged in order to shoot real shark footage off of Australia, which they were well experienced in doing. My recollection is they were involved with Peter Gimbel. I may be wrong about that, in Blue Water, White Death.
And Blue Water, White Death was and is the finest documentary ever made on sharks. It was done by Peter Gimbel with Ron and Valerie Taylor and Stan Waterman. They went with Rodney Fox down south in Australia, and they found the great white shark, and they did a documentary that stands alone 20-some years later as the pinnacle of shark documentaries, no matter what else has been done.
The producers asked Peter Gimbel if he would do the camera work on Jaws, and Peter said, "No, I won't do the camera work, but I'll direct for you."
We said, "But Peter, you've only directed sharks in a documentary. We're going to have actors." He said, "I don't care, I want to direct." And so Peter Gimbel never got to be associated with Jaws. We joked about it many times.
Peter said, "Well, sorry, I can't work on the production for you, but there are a couple in Australia, Ron and Valerie Taylor, who have experience with the great white shark. Why don't you contact them?" And sure enough, Universal Pictures contacted Valerie and I, but I explained that our sharks were only about 14 feet long, whereas Jaws was about 26 feet long.
I had this idea of doing a miniature cage and putting a little person into a miniature cage, and taking the little person, and that would scale the shark. That would have effectively scaled the shark up and added another, 9 feet to the overall length of the shark. And that kind of made sense to me. I remember this tenacious gentleman who came in to see me bleeding. And I said, "Why are you bleeding?" He said, "Well, I was afraid I was going to be late for this meeting. I really want this job. I got into a traffic accident in front of the main gate at Universal." I said, "You did?" He said, "Yeah, I came over here to have the meeting." I said, "You leave the scene of the accident? You're not supposed to leave the scene of the accident." And we sent him back to the accident to fill out the report with the police. But I remember I was thinking, what a brave man. And he really wants this job. And I was young and courageous and stupid, and I hired him.
And his name was Carl Rizzo. And Hollywood sent us this little man, and he couldn't dive. He had spent most of his life riding horses, doubling for children in films like National Velvet. He'd doubled for Elizabeth Taylor. And we had to take him out and stuff him into a cage and dangle him into the cold Southern Ocean and have sharks, big, huge, monstrous sharks swimming around him. And he was very much afraid, and we had a lot of difficulty getting him into the cage, which is probably quite understandable. We did have 2 little dummies because we were supposed to have somebody in the cage when the shark broke it up. But we had Carl, and he was much better. He looked better in the cage. He moved around a bit. We'd been working for about a week, and we still hadn't got the shots of the shark attacking the cage. I mean, they don't normally do that. They'd rather attack a bait. And there were 3 sharks in the area at the time, and 2 of them were fairly timid, but one of them came in, and he was a big, strong shark, and he swam around, and we had the small cage, the half-size cage, hanging on a bridle attached to a winch on the deck of the Skippy, and he swam over it and got his nose caught in the bridle and tried to swim forward and became trapped. And when a white shark is trapped, it goes crazy, and that's exactly what he did. And Ron was filming underwater, and actually that's how we got that footage, and they used it. They wanted someone in the cage at the time, but there was nobody in the cage, so they changed the script to suit that particular sequence because it was so dramatic.
Pull him up! Come on, quick, bring him in!
and it looked like the shark was destroying the cage. And in fact it did a lot of damage to the cage, but it broke it away from the small boat, and the whole lot came tumbling down past me and crashed down onto the bottom. That was the scariest thing I think I've ever seen underwater, because the whole lot was crashing. I could see the shark and the cage all crashing around down on the bottom, and I thought we were going to lose the cage because it had been broken away from the boat. The shark got out and swam away, but there were 2 other sharks still in the area. And there was no way that I could swim out of my cage and attach a rope. So what we did, we lowered my cage down onto the bottom, and I put my feet through the bottom of my cage and picked my cage up, almost like a lady pulls her skirt up, and walked the cage and myself over the bottom about 50 feet to the other broken cage which was laying on the bottom, tied it to my cage, and then I signalled for them to pull us both back to the surface.
Then why don't we have one more drink and go down and cut that shark open?
Martin? Can you do that?
I can do anything. I'm the chief of police.
Roy Scheider was interesting, story of how I cast him, because here's a situation where I was going after other actors. I went after a whole series of actors for him, a lot of them unknowns, people that no one had ever heard of before, but I was familiar with from seeing Serpico, and there was an actor in Serpico I kind of liked, and another actor on an off-Broadway play I had just seen. But the studio and Zanuck and Brown were kind of urging me to get a name in this part. And I was having trouble finding a name that I liked and who would do it. And I remember I was at a party one night.
And my agent brought me over to be introduced to him. And he was having a conversation with a writer named Tracy Keenan Wynn. And as I approached him, I heard a conversation that went something like this: we're going to have this giant shark come out of the water and land on a boat and crack the boat in half. And then I was introduced to him, and he said hello. He was very polite, very nice, very pleasant. And then as I was walking away, they picked up this conversation again. And I remember saying to my agent as we walked away, I said, those guys, they got to be kidding. They got to be kidding. A giant shark that cracks a boat in half? I thought they were loony.
I told him the entire story. At the end of the story, he said, wow, that's a great story. What about me? I looked at Roy and I said, yeah, you know, you'd be a great Chief Brody, because I had loved Roy from The French Connection, where he played Gene Hackman's partner. And that's how that came about.
Listen, can you tell me how I can find Chief Brody?
Who are you?
Matt Hooper. I'm from the Oceanographic Institute.
Richard Dreyfuss wasn't my first choice either. I went to John Voight first, and he said no, and I think I had interviewed Timothy Bottoms. I had interviewed a number of actors, perhaps Jeff Bridges. I was a big fan of the entire cast from Last Picture Show. I remember saying, if I can just get every member of the cast to say no to me to play the Hooper character, at least I will have gone to one of my favorite movies of all time to have gone out after that group. So I think Bridges and Bottoms, and I think we got turned down, or there were unavailability problems. In the movies, these things happen all the time. People either want to do it and they can't because they're booked into something else. And I remember Dreyfuss. I cast Dreyfuss basically because I loved American Graffiti, and I had seen him in that. And George Lucas was the person who sort of said to me, "Why don't you cast Ricky Dreyfuss? He'd be great."
And he told me this movie that he wanted to make, and it was really a shocker. I mean, even as he was telling it to me as a tale, it was a great, exciting story. These three guys alone on the boat, and the shark attacking the boat, and at the end he said, "You want to make this film?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, this sounds like it's going to be a great movie. I'd rather watch this movie than shoot it, because it's going to be a bitch to shoot. And I said, and he was surprised, but I said, I wouldn't do well under these circumstances, so I said no. Then a few months later, I went to see the opening of a film that I had done in Canada. It was the premiere of a film called The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz. And I saw myself, really for the first time, in the lead in a movie with my face 15 feet high on screen for 90 minutes. And I had a heart attack. I had a total nervous collapse. I thought I was awful. And I figured that I'd better get a job really soon. So I called Stephen, and I said, if you still want to offer me that job, I'll take it. And he said, yes. So in essence, I came crawling to Martha's Vineyard for the part.
I don't want no volunteers. I don't want no mates. There's too many captains on this island. $10,000 for me by myself. For that, you get the head, the tail, the whole damn thing.
My first choice to play Quint was Lee Marvin. And I wanted to go for Lee Marvin to play Quint, but Lee Marvin wasn't interested. And I think, I think what I heard was he wanted to go fishing for real. He took his fishing seriously and didn't want to go fishing from a movie boat with cameras, and that wasn't his idea of a vacation. Turned out not to be anybody's idea of a vacation, making Jaws. My second choice was Sterling Hayden, who I thought would make an amazing, Quint. He had an Ahab quality about him, and he had actually done a movie years ago where he played a whaler with a harpoon that he carried around with him. Very imposing character, and I was a big fan of his from certainly Dr. Strangelove and the two Kubrick films he did. And as it turned out, he couldn't do it either. I forgot actually what the reason was he couldn't do it. And there were other actors who wanted to play Quint, and then Dick Stanton and David Brown suggested Robert Shaw. It was their idea, because they had just worked with Robert Shaw in The Sting, which they produced, and loved him. And I screened two movies I'd already seen of Shaw's, just to refresh my memory. And one of them, of course, was A Man for All Seasons. And he was spectacular in that. And based on that, and of course, From Russia with Love, that great fight scene where he played the nemesis of 007 in the train, I said, wow, I wish I had thought of it. It's a great idea. So he fortunately said yes.
Robert was one of the most powerful people I've ever met. Incredibly intense. I mean, there was something that radiated out of him. He was a remarkably gifted actor and writer. He was also, unfortunately, the most extraordinarily competitive person, unnecessarily competitive. And I think that probably, if anything, that was his flaw.
You got city hands, Mr. Hooper. Been counting money all your life.
All right. Hey, I don't need this. I don't need this working-class hero crap.
You're not going to do this aboard the ship, are you, Mr. Quint?
Michael! Did you hear your father? Out of the water now! Now!
The first person I cast for the movie, in fact, was Lorraine, who I had loved in a TV movie I had seen her do called The Marcus Nelson Murders, starring Telly Savalas and herself, I believe, as Telly's wife, in that, and thought she was a very natural actress, almost improvisational in her style, and she brought a realism to the movie, a real realism to that family, which I wanted in the film.
Well, Ellen is very clear to me and always has been. You say Roy Scheider, his character, feels guilt because of the children. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, and I'm Jewish. You know, what could be clearer to me than how to make somebody feel guilty? This is something that I do in my sleep. It's what I've trained for, and I have two sons, just like Ellen Brody.
Martin, it's all psychological. You yell barracuda. Everybody says, huh? What? You yell shark. We've got a panic on our hands on the 4th of July.
Murray Hamilton I had just been a big fan of from the FBI story with James Stewart to The Graduate in that great scene, you know, with Dustin Hoffman, where he tells Dustin to go off and sow some wild oats. And I just always wanted to work with him. I don't know, I was a big fan of his and saw him instantly as the mayor of Amity. So for me, that was, I didn't have to go through 9 actors. He was the first choice for that part, and I was lucky enough to get him.
I've got to talk to Mrs. Kidney because this is going to turn into a contest.
Look, it's not just the Gazette. She's advertising in out-of-town papers. Now, people are going to be all over New England are going to know about it.
Most painful thing I've ever done as a writer is to take my part as an actor and make it smaller and smaller and smaller until it was almost gone. Even though I had good billing, I didn't follow through on screen with the amount of screen time I would have liked as an actor, but it turned out that it was better for the script that my character not be there so much.
Amity Island has long been known for its clean air, clear water, and beautiful white sand beaches. But in recent days, a cloud has appeared on the horizon of this beautiful resort community. A cloud in the shape of a killer shark.
One of the geniuses of David Brown was to realize that he could play upon the egos of writers and actors and other people who are not in the movie business necessarily by convincing us that only by our appearing in the film could the film achieve its true greatness. So he came to me and said, would I consider possibly as a favor to him being in this movie? Well, to a person who's done television for 4 years, to be in a feature film, this was not exactly a request that I found it difficult to accept.
In Amity Island, this is Alan Craig. I want to try that end again. Okay? All right. And there you have it. 2 different opinions by 2 men of goodwill. But here in Amity, it seems it's the public that's making up its mind. On Amity Island, this is Alan Craig. All right, Murray, that'll do it.
Save it.
When it came down to where we would shoot this film, we sent Joe Alves, our production designer, out with a team to give us some ideas and some photographs and pictures of where this town should be shot, and including Jamaica. We thought of Jamaica primarily because of the clarity of the water. We could do underwater work down there and do it all there. And one of the places, obviously, that they went, among others, was the island of Martha's Vineyard, which, believe it or not, had never been photographed by a feature film before. They had very strict rules and regulations there, and had always kept movie companies in. So it really was a question of talking them into letting, at the height of their season, letting a big movie company come in there.
Martha's Vineyard did present the problem that this pristine place, unchanged since, what, the 18th century, didn't particularly care for a movie invasion. They didn't like to see an artificial shark parked in a channel where their homes faced it. And the only set that we built, which was Quent's shack, we had to post a bond with the town authorities that everything would be replaced exactly the way it was.
The billboard in the picture, where they put up a billboard and some kids have come along and made a prank out of it and painted in the shark and help and so forth. We had to put up that billboard one morning, shoot the scene, and take it down at the end of the day.
The real attraction of Martha's Vineyard you couldn't see with the naked eye. It was the fact that it was the only place on the East Coast where I could go 12 miles out to sea and still have a sandy bottom only 30 feet below the surface of the water, where we could put the shark sled and where the mechanical shark could function. So Martha's Vineyard was chosen less because it was a very picturesque village. I could have shot this movie in Sag Harbor or Montauk or a number of places. It was because of that sandy bottom 12 miles offshore. It's very important that no matter what direction my camera's turned, I didn't want to see land. I felt, my fear was, the minute the audience saw land, they'd say, look, this is getting pretty intense out here. Just turn the boat around and go toward that land that we keep seeing in your movie. I wanted the audience to feel very cut off, like they couldn't just run back to shore because there was no shore to run back to.
What's your name again?
Chrissy.
Where are we going?
swimming!
I started doing stunt work, and I specialized in water, so a lot of times when the water stunts would come up, I got into doing the water stunts also. Steven Spielberg was a little bit leery having me because I wasn't an actress per se. After the first day of shooting, we did the beach scene the first day, the party scene at night, and we got along wonderful after that. So whatever I did, he liked, and it was great. He was a great person to work for.
I thought that what could really be scary was not seeing the shark and just seeing the water, because we all are familiar with the water. Very few of us have been in the water with a shark. But we've all gone swimming. And the idea of this girl going swimming and the audience going swimming with her would have been too extraordinary if, like a leviathan, the shark had come out of the water with its jaws agape and come down on her. And it would have been a spectacular opening for the film, but there would have been nothing primal about it. It would just have been a monster moment that we've all seen. And I really wanted to do it without seeing the shark in that case, and I wanted the violent jerking motions to just start to trigger our imaginations into either thinking about what's happening below the surface of the waterline or blocking what was happening below the surface.
The first jerk down, Steven did. He had a cable that came to the front of my stomach and went to an anchor that was laying on the bottom of the ocean. And then he just sat, and when he wanted that pull, he just would pull. And I could feel him pulling down, and I just threw my head back even more. They wanted to put me on an electric winch. And I prefer not to use an electric winch, because if any of the line overrode and came to a stop, I might not know it, and I might not be able to get out of it. And being they're pulling me back and forth in the water, I wanted to have more control, so we used manpower. They put cut-off Levi's on and had cables running from me out to the side to 2 pilings, and then all the way into the beach. And what they would do is we'd put marks on the beach, and the guys, we'd have 5 or 6 guys on each line, and they would run back and forth from mark to mark. So I didn't have the hard work to do. I just kind of sat there and got pulled around. The guys were running back and forth on the beach. And that's what made my body move back and forth in the frame. And then when I would feel my hips getting pulled the opposite way, I'd just throw my arms out of water very violently the opposite way. So physically, I could make it look more violent than what it was. I went to a marine store and bought like a safety hook that you'd use on a sail, on the halyard of a sail. And I put it onto all the cables that they hooked to me, so that at any time during the scene, if I got in trouble, if I got water, if I got hurt, God knows what happened, I could pull one of those strings and I was free and clear and could come to the surface. So what it was it allowed me, if I got in a spot, to free myself. Because how would anybody know if I was hurt or I needed anything? I'm out there screaming like a fool. We looped the film. Of course, a lot of the stuff we couldn't do because of the noise made, so you go into a looping studio. And the idea was, how are you going to sound like you're in the water sitting in a studio? So we came up with the idea of getting a baby bassinet and filling it with water. So I'm sitting on the sound stage, you know, with the film up on the screen, on a stool with my little bassinet, and Richard Dreyfuss came in.
Well, I came to visit Steven, or I came to do my own looping. I'm not really sure now. It was so long ago. And I walked in, and Steven had this beautiful girl's blonde head reared back like this, and he was pouring water down her throat like this. I'm telling her to scream her bloody lungs out, which I thought was a rather interesting way to spend the afternoon, but not particularly comfortable for her. But it does work for the movie. I mean, the reason they were doing it was to make the appropriate sound, and they couldn't do it any other way, so he just poured that water down her throat.
Oh, Jesus. Well, the problem was they brought the hand to me, and they said, here's the dead girl's hand. And I said, wow, it looks like shiny plastic. It looks fake. And they said, well, you know, after a body's been decomposing for a day on the sand with the sun coming down, that it sort of takes on that look. I said, well, you might be clinically right, you know, and a pathologist might certainly look at that and admire that moment in Jaws. But to me, as an audience member, it looks fake. It looks like plastic. And we tried to powder it. I remember putting powder on it to get the reflective shine off. We couldn't do that. So I just sort of said, well, screw it. And I believe I turned to someone and said, let me use your arm. And I, kind of like we do when we're kids, we bury our parents in the sand. I kind of buried her in the sand and just had her hand sticking out. And we made up part of the arm so it seemed right up here, it looked like it had been bitten off in a kind of a subtle way. And then there were these little sand crabs that we had collected and put all over the arm, and they were kind of lethargic in their movements. To this day when I see Jaws, I always have this different vision of 10 times as many crabs moving 10 times as fast, trying to feed on the arm. And I later was able to do that in a Temple of Doom, when I was able to get the bugs to do what the crabs couldn't do, 15 years earlier. The death of the Kintner boy and all the paranoia and the tension and the suspense leading up to the actual attack when he's out on the raft, I, in my mind, wanted to do in one shot. And in trying to figure out, in a perfect world, how could I have done that in one sustained shot? I came up with the idea to have bathers with different colored bathing suits walking in front of the camera that would wipe off Roy Scheider, and the same color in the reverse, moving in certainly the other direction, would wipe on what he's looking at, which, even though it wouldn't be one shot, would give more of a seamless feeling and much more of a clear point of view, that you knew who was looking at who, that all this must be from the police chief's point of view. The scene's about him, it's about his reaction. It's not about the Kintner boy being killed. It's about the chief of police, his fear of the water, his chief responsibility to protect the public, his fear that there is a shark out there, and he knows it's out there, and these people are going swimming anyway.
Did you see that?
This guy here trying to knock me down $100 a day.
Hello. Hello, Beck. Young fella, how are you?
Craig Kingsbury was a local on Martha's Vineyard, and he was quite a character. He himself was a movie and a book. And, had I not gotten Robert Shaw and had I met him in an open casting call, I might have come very close to flirting with the idea of using him to play Quint, because he was the purest version of who, in my mind, Quint really was. And when I met him, he just came up with this great dialogue, and I kind of kept increasing his part. And just by meeting him, I said, I want you to be in my movie, and you can make up your own dialogue. And he made up all that stuff when he's in the boat, and he says, you're going to wish your mothers never met their fathers when you start, piling into those reefs, boy.
When we get them silly bastards down in that rock pile, there'll be some fun. They'll wish their fathers had never met their mothers when they start taking their bottoms out and slamming into them rocks, boy.
There's no shortage of drunks on the island. Craig Kingsbury had the distinction of being the only guy who was driving under the influence a team of oxen and was loaded and smashed and driving these cows around.
Just in talking about fishing and sharking and this and that, Craig gave me some great lines. And, one of the lines was, it's not like going out there to get a great, it's not like going out there to catch bluegills or tomicods. That's Craig's line.
I'll catch this bird for you, but it ain't gonna be easy. Bad fish. Not like going down the pond chasing bluegills or tomicods. This shark, swallow you whole.
Craig Kingsbury, because he played Ben Gardner, got to have his head life cast for the mold for the severed head that appears in the film.
I was going to be a victim in the estuary. I'm in a boat, in a little rowboat, and the way they shot it the first time, where I'm in the shark's mouth with a blood pack in my mouth, I'm going on top of water, underwater, on top of spitting blood out, and I'm trying to make a lot of movement, but it was very awkward the way this seat was, and I was trying to make a lot of movement like I was in the shark's mouth going underwater on top of water. And then I see Roy's son staring at me, and as a last-ditch effort, the shark is heading right towards him, and I just make a move to grab him, and I let him, I think I just touched him, and I let him go, and then I go underwater and disappear. Well, what happened in that scene is, it was so violent and so horrendous that they couldn't use it. It was just too violent, period. And I was in this little bucket seat strapped into it, and the shark fin was behind me on a sled. I had the kid in my arms, and I was going to take him underwater, and then I let him go, and then the sled went underwater.
Teddy Grossman is in the jaws of the shark. The shark's underwater, and Teddy, like the maidenhead on a ship, is traveling toward this kid vomiting blood. That's much more horrible than what I had done, in the first third of Jaws. And I just didn't like it. It was too bloody, and I thought it was in bad taste, so I cut it out.
Come on, Chief, this isn't no Boy Scout picnic. See, you got your rubbers.
I asked Robert to give Lorraine a hard time inside the scene, because he's really sort of putting down Chief Brody. He thinks Chief Brody's a sissy, and he's putting down the fact he's all in rubber, he says, "You're glad you brought your rubbers, Chief." And he's always, he's always doing this to everybody, to Brody's character and to Brody and to Hooper. And so I asked him to chide Lorraine, and in the middle of the scene, he made up this little poem that went, there was a woman named Mary who lost her virginity, not a bad record for this vicinity, whatever it was. And when it was all over, I said, you got to help me clear this. If that's from a song, we just can't use that without paying for the rights. He said, no, I don't think we'll be sued because I got it from a tombstone in Ireland. And that's where he found that little ditty.
Here lies the body of Mary Lee, died at the age of 103. For 15 years, she kept her virginity. Not a bad record for this vicinity. If they don't like you going out, they'll love you coming in.
For Jaws, I wanted the color red to be the blood, and not to be a bandana around someone's neck or a plaid overshirt or the letters on a boat. The only red I wanted in the movie was blood, and I told the production designer, Joe Alves, at the very beginning, to please, when you're designing the picture and you're finding your colors, don't find red, just allow red to be the blood. And in a sense, I think we pretty much stuck to that. I think that's what happened. We did have red wine, but there's a bit of a symbol, it's a bit symbolic.
Keep that chum line going, Chief. We got 5 good miles on him.
When the shooting started at sea, the production got a lot more difficult. That's when they started worrying about wind and weather, when they could spend a day on the ocean and get 6 seconds of usable film because of boats on the horizon, because of malfunctioning shark.
The problems of shooting at sea are enormous because the wind, the waves, everything is moving, and nothing stays the same for more than 50, 60 seconds.
I would set up a shot, and I'd get my camera all set, and all of a sudden the electrical barge would start drifting in a tide that was moving this way, and the camera barge would start drifting this way, and the orca would start moving around on its 2 anchors. And before you knew it, we were all out of position. It took another hour and a half to re-anchor and get set again. And just as we got set, sailboats from a regatta would come in.
You're shooting towards the horizon, right? And the camera has got the horizon. Boop. Then all of a sudden we would see a little sail. And as soon as that sail was in shot, we had to stop and wait till it went all the way across here, which took an hour and a half. And hope that at the end of that hour and a half, another one didn't come. So we were always like, we were, as the sailing ship went off, we were going like, ready, speed. action! Oh, there's another one! Oh, God damn it. We were always, I mean, that put 3 hours a day onto our schedule.
And I'd sit there saying, okay, do I wait here for an hour for the regatta to pass, or do we turn 18 to 25 anchors, move everything to look in this direction? And we used to do calculations and say, it'll take an hour for the regatta to get from here to here, and an hour and 10 minutes to get all your anchors and look back this way. Let's wait for the sailboats to move out of the shot. And it just was frustrating for all of us.
You're going to need a bigger boat.
One of the most remembered and oft-quoted lines in the movie is Roy Scheider saying, "We got to get a bigger boat," which he improvised on the set, and I acknowledge that as a writer. I'm pleased that he said that.
The line, "We're going to need a bigger boat," which has become part of the language for people who are faced with an insurmountable problem.
That's a 20-footer. 25. 3 tons on them.
The studio was overloaded with their own effects projects at the time, Hindenburg and Earthquake, and Marshall Green, the head of production, said, take it and find someone to do it. So I started interviewing various effects people, and I went to Disney's and other places that do mechanical objects, animals and what have you. And I wasn't having any luck. Everyone was telling me it can't be done, it would take 3 years in development. And I heard about this guy that had been retired for some time, who did the giant squid in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And his name was Bob Matty. And so when I met Bob, I didn't get the usual pessimistic attitude that you can't do this, you can't make this full, size shark and you shoot in the real ocean. And instead I got this very enthusiastic, yes, we could do anything. Probably the reason that Stephen and I decided, in a naive sort of way, that we were going to build a full-size shark and shoot the real ocean and not a tank or not a miniature. And maybe that was lack of experience or whatever, but everyone kept telling us we couldn't do it. So when I found Bob Matty, who actually had made some of these giant creatures, very enthusiastic about it, it was very encouraging. It had to be a formidable, shark. And we made various sketches of 30-foot sharks and 20-foot sharks, and it came up with a reasonable size would be 25 feet. Very, formidable, yet not Moby Dick. And there have been sharks that have been sighted that have been that size, and they've actually caught some that were 21 feet. So it was a credible animal we were making. Doing the initial studies of the great white shark, I went to the Steinhardt, and I borrowed this set of jaws, which was huge. It's about 18, 20-foot shark. We made our shark larger by another 5 or 6 feet, but we kept everything in proportion. The teeth, when I started doing the actual drawings, for the construction of the shark, we used everything in proper proportion. Getting the right personnel. It was sort of like, it reminds me of Magnificent Seven, when they're going out and you're picking, you know, 6 great guys, you know, 6 big guns. And we heard of this young man in the plastics section by the name of Roy Arbogast. And he was an expert on rubber forms and new plastics and things like that. So we decided he would be perfect to make the mold. And then there was Richie Helmer and Bill Short, who were excellent in electronics. And we were going to do, all this had to be, you know, electrically activated valves that would work the rams and various things of that night. And we were using hydraulics instead of pneumatics because, I mean, we were using pneumatics instead of hydraulics because we didn't want an oil break in the water. So we had to get hydraulic experts too. And then we had Mike and Gary Woods, who were excellent welders. So we assembled this team, and they started on the frame of the shark. So we were working sort of like from the outside in and the inside out. We were separately modeling the shark, and then at the same time they were making the skeleton, and we hoped that they would all fit together. And there was a time element. The time element was this, is that it was already the first of the year in 1974, and we knew we would have a summer window in which to shoot this. Especially that we were going to go back east, we decided to shoot this in the area that it was written for, New England. So we had a time element there. And we built the shark and tested the shark dry.
We were asked to make comments about the mechanical shark, and I think it helped them to a certain extent because I think they had too much animation in the shark. The shark, in reality, moves in a very smooth, leisurely manner.
I can remember it sort of coming up out of the water like that, very fast, vertically, and they don't do that. They sort of come up, you know, it's a slow, it's not really slow, but it looks slow. And they took our advice, and I know that it made a big difference to the end result.
Well, we had a number of different shark components. We had the full shark, which I call the great white turd, which kind of, we pulled along in the water, and it was often on this huge gantry, like a crane arm. And the crane arm was tucked all the way at the 30-foot bottom, you couldn't see the shark. But when the crane arm, as quickly as they could blow the ballast and force the arm out of the water, the shark would rise out of the water. The shark could be gimbaled separately on the arm to have an attitude change at the top of the crane arm. We had that. We had just a fin that was pulled through the water. And we had a left to right shark and a right to left shark. And the left to right shark, of course, had no left side. It was all scooped out. And vice versa for the other shark.
Bob needed some area like this that he could get all those hoses and wires and stuff and have access to all the mechanical stuff, whatever needed to be repaired. So if we were shooting this one here with the hole here, we could only shoot from the other side. So in this case, this would be the left to right shark. Yeah.
The shark in Jaws and all subsequent editions is always called Bruce. And the reason he was called Bruce is because Stephen named him that after his lawyer, Bruce Raymer.
That's a much maligned shark, and I'm kind of responsible for creating a lot of the bad mouthing about the shark, because the shark was frustrating. It didn't really work all the time. It didn't work hardly at all.
I remember in particular being on our barge watching the first shark test, at which time the shark simply sank to the bottom of Nantucket Sound, and we felt that our careers in motion pictures had gone with it. Frogmen were delegated to recover it and bring it back to the surface. Everything that could go wrong with a shark went wrong with the various sharks, the various types, head, fin, tails.
The ocean was so brutal on the mechanics. All the pneumatic tubes, all of that special equipment was being dashed and brutalized by the ocean every day.
There were all these radio mics all over the island, you know, the universal radio mics. So wherever you were on the island, you could hear the radio mics. And they were always saying, the shark is not working, the shark is not working, repeat, the shark is not working. No matter where you were, and for months.
We just waited around. We just waited and waited and waited.
And I remember every day, about the 50th or 60th day of shooting, the crew would come over to me and they'd all ask me during the day, when are we going to be done with this movie? And I would honestly say to them, with complete sympathy for the question, I don't know. I don't know when we're going to finish this movie. We could finish it if I get fired and dragged off the movie, then somebody else could come in and finish it quickly. Maybe they'll shut us down.
Show me the way to go home. I'm tired and I want to go to bed. I had a little drink about an hour ago and I got right to my head.
And I remember how we got tears in our eyes when we sang the song, Show Me the Way to Go Home. I'm tired and I want to go to bed, which is sung in the film by the three principals. I remember looking around at Charlesie, the script girl, and other people on the set with tears in their eyes, not because it was a sweet, emotional scene. That had become their mantra. That's all they could think about, was what was home like. And they missed their kids, and they missed their backyards, and they missed their, their families and their lifestyles. And in a sense, that's why I always saw myself in the negative. I saw myself as James Cagney in Mr. Roberts, not letting the shore, the crew, get to shore. Now, by the way, the crew did get to shore. They got to shore every Sunday that we had off. We shot 6-day weeks, but I never left the island. And the reason I never left the island in all those 7 months of shooting on Martha's Vineyard was because if I left the island, I was certain I would never come back.
The delays in the ocean and the fact that we'd been on the island for 4 or 5 months now, we're all getting a little strange. So there was I don't know if it was a charity dinner or not, but there was a function, a splendid buffet of wonderful food.
There was this tremendous buffet of desserts, strawberry shortcake and Boston cream pies and chocolate eclairs and Napoleons and some Jell-O and also gravy and potatoes.
I'd said to Rick Fields, who was Verna Fields' son, I said, suppose there was a food fight. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, just start throwing some food.
Roy started it. Roy threw a big glob of mashed potatoes and gravy right into my face. And before I could recover and throw something at him, Richard Dreyfuss, I think, took his dessert and threw it into Roy's face. Right center, nose, eyes, mouth, the whole thing. Roy turned, he took 2 or 3 desserts, threw them at Richard. Richard ducked and it hit somebody behind him. And it was a bit of a Three Stooges brawl. I remember Dick and David got up and left right away. They saw it was coming. And in about 30 seconds, we were actually standing, hurling food at each other.
And before, it was a melee after that. Just food all over the floor, all the help that was there serving the dinner, they came out, they laughed like crazy. I don't know if some of the townspeople appreciated it as much as we did, but it was a tremendous blowing off of steam.
And I remember Richard and Roy, covered in food, running out to the Kelly House swimming pool and diving in the water. And all this once yummy food, like, Technicolor silt rising to the surface of this otherwise turquoise pool. And I remember saying, what the heck, and I jumped into and washed myself off. But, I mean, that was what happens in the Navy when you just, aren't given shore leave. Let that be a lesson.
The decision to continue filming Jaws was a very shaky one. Our technical people, what Steven Spielberg was fond of calling our special defects department, wanted us to stop so they could perfect it. Dick and I battle-scarred veterans of the movie wars knew that you never take the film out of the camera because they may never let you put it back in, particularly with a movie like this. Even if we got 1/16th of a page of script a day, you kept moving. Stephen at one point considered moving our whole crew to the Bahamas where the waters were tranquil and everything, and we weren't in favor of that. Just keep shooting. Keep shooting and make do with what you've got.
This whole system with the barrels, that kept the shark alive. I mean, when those barrels came up, the shark was there. And that really saved us. It saved us, or we'd still be there waiting for the shark to work, really.
Finally, after all this, I mean, it was maybe September, that we got the shark to raise out of the water. And that was that one shot with the Roy Scheider, and it just barely worked.
Okay. Good blood.
And action, Roy.
Slow ahead. I can go slow ahead. You ought to come down and ladle some of this shit.
And down. And cut.
And then one day, you heard this. The shark is working. Repeat, the shark is working.
The shark worked well enough that we, for a while there, had the biggest hit of all time. So I really owe the shark a lot more than I want to take away from it right now. And I owe Bob Maddy and his team a lot as well. There was the one orca, which originally was called the Warlock, was a boat that was purchased by Joe Alves, the production designer, and he chose the boat. And I liked the boat a lot, but I didn't think it didn't have enough character to it. And Joe agreed, and Joe actually replaced the entire wheelhouse with one of his own design with larger windows, because the windows were too small, and Joe and I both wanted larger windows so we could see out. So everywhere you were inside the boat, the ocean was breathing down your neck, rather than looking through a small porthole and saying, well, the ocean's sort of like that could have been a process shot. So I wanted really big windows in the wheelhouse, in the main cabin, and Joe kind of reconfigured the boat to give it a little more personality, squared off a little bit more than the original boat we bought was.
We were shooting about, I don't know, 75 yards, I'm really not sure, off the coast of Chappaquiddick Island. Robert, Roy, myself, Freddie Zendar, the boat wrangler, and an ancient sound man with a Nagra.
And what happened was, is we were pulling one of the barrels away from the boat. They had put a little eye hook into one of the boards just below the surface, just below the water line, like a shiv. So the rope would go through the shiv, and it would seem to pull the barrel toward the orca, as if the shark was heading toward the orca. The problem was the motorboat went so fast, it pulled the shiv and the planking out from the hull of the orca, and of course the water rushed in.
And we started to sink. No kidding. No kidding. Water started rushing onto the boat. Freddie Zendar jumps up from the hold, cursing and screaming in Austrian, and starts to power the boat as fast as he could toward the beach of Chappaquiddick Island, hoping to be able to ground the boat before it sinks, and we have no orca. There's only one orca. In the meantime, we're in 6-foot swells, and Steven Spielberg is trying to send safety boats to get us transferred off the boat. Get the actors off the boat! Get the actors off the boat!
I remember John Carter, who won an Academy Award, by the way, for Best Sound for Jaws. He picked up the Nagra. He was on the boat and held it over his head and said, "The actors saved the sound department." And I had this image to this day of John sinking, holding the Nagra over his head, the water up to John's ankles, up to his knees, boat scrambling to pull everybody off the sinking orca, and John with his Nagra going under.
There was a certain level of executive indifference to the sound department's lifespan. Get the actors off the boat!
We had lost the camera. The camera was on the boat too. It went underwater. And Bill Butler said, you know, in a sense, the developing solution we use is a saline solution, and I think this film's going to be okay if we can rush it to the lab.
We got on an airplane with a bucket of water and the film in it and took it to New York and developed it and didn't lose a foot.
Bill Butler created equipment just to make Jaws. He created a camera platform that, according to the tides or where you wanted to be with your lens, could go either just below the surface of the water or way above the surface of the water. And he designed it and had it built for the movie. He also created, he didn't create the water box where he put the camera, but he reconfigured the water box so it was easy to get the focus, your hand in there so you could pull focus and still have the water lapping the lens. I really wanted this movie to be just at water level, the way we are when we're treading water. We don't see water 3 feet off the water. We see water like this. And I wanted to get the camera right down to where the human point of view is most accustomed to being when you're swimming. And that's why I shot at least, I'd say, 25% of the movie from that water box that Bill Butler reconfigured for us.
When it came time to do Jaws, they hadn't done a water picture for several years. And the old-fashioned way of doing a water picture was to use a gimbal. It weighs about 400 pounds. It's very clumsy. It does keep the camera level aboard ship. But it's too clumsy to do a film the way they do films today. And so I chose to handhold the camera. And when Stephen heard about this, he was rather shocked because he didn't really want a handheld picture. But he didn't realize that I didn't really mean to do a handheld film in the terms that they had then used or thought about handheld on land, but rather to use the knees and the body to take the roll out of the film. And so we gave that a try, and it worked very well. And after he saw a demonstration, he decided that was the way to do it. And as a matter of fact, Jaws ended up being a film shot mostly handheld.
Want to see something permanent? Boom, boom, boom.
That was Robert's idea. Robert Shaw, said, I've got this tooth that's fake. And he pulled his cap off, and the little nub was under it. And he said, can I take that off as an addition to the scar comparing contest?
Jehovah, that's the USS Indianapolis. You were on the Indianapolis?
The Indianapolis speech about the atomic bomb that had been taken from Tinian the Lady, which for me is my favorite part of Jaws, this speech that Shaw gives about that. That was conceived by Howard Sackler, who only really wrote a short paragraph as Quint starts to talk about one of the reasons he kills sharks today is what sharks did to him and his shipmates back in 1945. And it was a wonderful scene that I kept trying to get Howard Sackler to expand, but Howard felt shorter was better and never would elaborate on it. And one day I was talking to John Milius, and I said, could you make this longer? Because I think it's a speech, not just a couple of short paragraphs. And John said, sure, I love the speech. It's a great idea. I'll try. And so John sat down and he wrote page after page in longhand, I believe, and sent me the actual original longhand version of a very, very long Quint speech, which was essentially too much, but pared down, it was going to be great. When Robert Shaw read it, Shaw, who himself had written Man in the Glass Booth, was an accomplished playwright, Shaw said, it's too hard for me to play John. There's too much John Huston in some of this dialogue. And Huston could say this, but I can't say it as well as Huston. Let me have a chance of rewriting it. So, and then Shaw rewrote Milius, who had rewritten Sackler, and the speech in the movie is basically Shaw's version of Milius' version of Sackler's version.
Very first light, Chief. Sharks come cruising. So we formed ourselves into tight groups. It's kind of like old squares in a battle, like you see in a calendar, like the Battle of Waterloo, and the idea was shark comes to the nearest man, that man he starts pounding and hollering and screaming. Sometimes the shark would go away. Sometimes he wouldn't go away.
The final telling of the Indianapolis tale was one of the most riveting. Sometimes when you're watching another actor tell a story, you're making up your interest. When Robert told that story, I couldn't keep my eyes off him.
In both the book and the early versions of the script, Quint is harpooning the shark. His leg gets caught in the rope. He gets dragged over the side to his death, where he drowns, and is probably bitten too, as far as I know. He dies the way Ahab dies in Moby Dick. It always seemed to us that if Quint is going to die, he should be bitten. The best thing would be if he could go mano a mano and stab the shark, which he does, and his, formidable human talents are no match for the formidable shark talents of the fish. So we chose the ending that we have in the movie, which is that he slides into the great jaws of the fish and gets chomped. And Scheider, sees it and is terrified.
The second boat, the second orca that was constructed, was built just to sink and then pump air back in the ballast, and it would come up for take two and then sink a second time or as many times as we had to sink it. And that was, of course, for the shot where the boat starts to sink and Roy Scheider has to climb out the flipping window and climb the mast as the boat goes down, and he only has one final opportunity to succeed. Blow up.
The most interesting conflict, as far as I'm concerned, happened between me and Stephen when it came to the discussion of the ending. Because he said to me, the ending of the book is a downer. The shark gets stabbed with a harpoon, can't hold up the barrels, and eventually drowns, spins slowly to the bottom, and the movie, or the book, the story ends, if you will. The characters are saved. That is not a big, rousing ending, and I need a big, rousing ending. So he said, here is what I propose to do. And he told me the ending that he had in mind. And I said, Stephen, that is completely unbelievable. It can't happen. A shark does not bite down on a scuba tank and explode like an oil refinery. He said, I don't care. He said, if I have got them for 2 hours, they will believe whatever I do for the next 3 minutes, because I've got them in my hands, and I want the audience on their feet screaming at the end, yes, 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 this is what should happen to this animal, which reminded me, in retrospect, of the Bill Goldman thing, which is that reality may be great and truth may be wonderful, but none of it holds a candle to believability. And if the filmmaker has done his job and brought you into believability, he can do anything. Play by the rules. Set the rules, but follow the rules. And that's exactly what Stephen did. He was right. I was wrong in this entire argument, which was that his ending brought people to their feet screaming, yes, 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 this is the way it should be. And it may be incredible, but it was the right thing to do.
Smile, you son of a bitch!
In Duel, you hear the sound of, in fact, it was a dinosaur growling from an old B dinosaur picture when the truck went over the cliff, because I'd always imagined the truck to be a bit like a T-Rex chasing a car. And I used the very same sound effect in Jaws, almost as a bit of just a reminder that there was a kinship between both stories, as the shark is sinking to the bottom of the ocean after it's been exploded by the compressed air.
One of the great pieces of Spielbergian genius was the fact that at the end of the movie Jaws, the Richard Dreyfuss character pops up and they swim to shore together. This brought cheers, of course. It was what the audience wanted.
I used to hate the water. I can't imagine why.
when I finally did leave the island, just before the last shot, which was the blowing up of the shark, I left the island for two reasons. One, I heard the crew wanted to throw me overboard. I didn't know whether they were going to throw me overboard in cement slippers or throw me overboard via the poop deck, one bounce and then into the water, or whether it was going to be just, you know, into the water with a 2-foot sandy bottom. I didn't know what they were going to do to me, so I thought I'd get out of there quickly. And I remember when I got to Boston on the ferry, we spent the night in Boston, and the next day we were scheduled, Dreyfus and I, to fly back to Los Angeles on American Airlines. And I vividly recall getting into my hotel room and having a complete anxiety breakdown. I mean, it's just a complete, I don't know what you would call it, just it was a breakdown. I mean, I couldn't stop shaking. My jaw was clenched. I couldn't open my mouth. I was getting electrical shocks through my brain, like I was having seizures or something. And I know this sounds like really melodramatic, but it's exactly what happened. You know, something neurological, emotional, something was happening to me, and it was a full, you know, panic attack, which I, you know, don't remember ever having at that level before. And I remember calling Richard up, and he was down in the pub downstairs, and Richard came up with me. And I just said, I'm in really bad shape, Ricky. And Rick said, well, don't worry, we'll be on the airplane tomorrow, which we were.
Good grief. Am I in trouble, Jaws? In Jaws trouble?
Verna was great. We used to call her, our affectionate nickname for Verna Fields was Mother Cutter, because she was like our mom, and she cooked for us, and she told us great stories of Peter Bogdanovich and all the films that she cut with him, and she was just a great person. You know, she was a very charismatic person. She was the most charismatic person on Jaws, her and Robert Shaw, except she never came out to see. She was always in her cutting room. And it was frustrating for Verna for two reasons. One, she never had enough film to cut, because I was only getting, on a good day I get 5 shots, on a good day at sea, 5 shots. On an average day about 3, on a bad day, none. So Verna didn't have a lot of film racing into her cutting room to put together, so she had to be on the island with us for 7 months with very little to cut. Verna didn't have the film until we finished the movie. That's when Verna's work got started, and Verna and I worked every day on the picture at her house in her little cutting room by the pool, and she did a great job. What are we looking for?
Well, we're looking for a nice place to show that Quint refuses to slow down the boat. That's the spot, Steve.
My recollection is that we showed the film, a cut version of the film, with one big sequence missing, without Johnny Williams' music, in a projection room at Universal Studios. And when the lights went on, there was no reaction at all, as I recall. And I recall turning around and saying, well, Sid, what do you think? He said, it's okay. Well, okay was like being given 1/2 a star. Okay for 159 days? Well, of course it was only okay. It didn't have Johnny Williams' music. It didn't have some major underwater stuff that we filmed in the tank at MGM Studios. In order to get very close angles underwater, we couldn't get the waters of Martha Vineyard, both cold and murky, wouldn't allow us to do much underwater stuff. Metro had this great Esther Williams tank, as it used to be called. So the reaction was, go get the rest of the movie.
Well, when they came back from Martha's Vineyard, they realized that they didn't have the footage, as I understood it, that they needed of Hooper and the shark together in the cage. And I went in, and we went down to Culver City to MGM Studios and shot it in a tank down there.
There were 3 intercuts for the sequence where the shark attacks the cage. The one, of course, was Dick Warlock, who was the stunt person inside the cage, subbing for Richard Dreyfuss. The second was the Rizzo Shoot with Ron and Val in Australia. And there was Frank Sparks, whose eyes I actually used to substitute for Richard Dreyfuss's eyes, because Richard was unavailable when I was shooting the inserts. So when you see the Richard Dreyfuss scream, that's not Richard's face. Those aren't Richard's eyes. That's a guy named Sparks.
Down in the tank was a metal apparatus that the shark was attached to, where it could move forward and backward, sideways, up and down. So it had pretty good movement, real natural movement, you know, and it was operated by a special effects man. His name is Whitey Crum. As Whitey was looking in one window, watching the shark from the side with the controls, Mr. Spielberg was around the other side, or a quarter of the way around, looking at it from another perspective. He was looking at the shark coming directly at the cage.
No, bring it out now. Bring it out. Bring it out. Okay, attack. Attack. Wait. Oh, cut. Once again, right away. Yeah, next time, okay?
1, 2, 3.
I had always wanted to be in business with John Williams all my life. And when he said yes to Sugarland, we became friends, and obviously I wanted him to do every picture I ever made, and Jaws came second. And when John saw the movie, he called me up on the phone and he said, "This is like a pirate movie." And he said, "I think we need pirate music for this, because this is primal, but it's also fun and entertaining."
This idea of characterizing the shark musically, these low thumping ostinato notes in the bass, you know, were the result of a very simple idea that I had, that I thought that the shark should be represented by something in sound or in music, probably music, because there's no sound underneath the water, we thought. Today you might do it with sound effects, but I thought maybe some kind of driving thing in the bottom of the orchestra might indicate this, the mindless attack of the shark. It's all instinct. There's no real intelligence behind it. It's an unstoppable bum, 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 bum. This thing comes at you, and whatever you can't fight it off without destroying it, because of this relentless drive that it has.
When he finally played the music for me on the piano, he previewed the main Jaws theme. I expected to hear something kind of weird and melodic, you know, and kind of tonal but eerie and of another world, almost a bit like outer space, inside, you know, inner space, under the water. And what he played me instead with two fingers on the lower keys was dun 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 dun. And at first I began to laugh. I thought he had a great sense of humor. I thought he was putting me on. And he said, "No, that's the theme to Jaws." And I said, "Play it again." He played it again, and he played it again, and it suddenly seemed right. But when I first heard it, it seemed wrong, because it just seemed too simple. And so simple. Often the best ideas are the simplest ones. And John found a signature for the entire movie.
One could alter the speed of this ostinato. It could be note, 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 any kind of alteration of speed to very slow, very fast, very soft, very loud. All of these things could manipulate the moment to illustrate that the shark was at the highest pitch of frenzy or something lower. And this simple dramatic device seemed to be what we needed.
Part of the genius of John Williams is how he spots music and how he places music in a movie. That's sort of, you know, that's sort of something that's never discussed about the art of composition is the placement of that composition. You know, and John did not want music to celebrate a red herring. He only wanted music to signal the actual arrival of the shark.
There were opportunities in the movie to advertise the shark with the music, and also opportunities when we don't have the music and the audience has a sense of an absence. They sense the absence of the shark because they don't hear the thump-thump, because we've conditioned them to do that. But then you may go one step further, and we know now that the shark really is there, but we haven't advertised it with music, so his attack comes out of silence. And now, because you've been conditioned to have the music every time when you don't, and the shark arrives, it's even more terrifying. It's one of the beauties of the film medium that when you combine music with this kind of visual thing, you can get this association in people's minds. I think if you did it musically just in a concert piece, it wouldn't have the same effect. It's the combination of the visual and the situation, this being the shark or the knifing scene in Hitchcock's Psycho, combined with the notes. That combination of sound and image forming a memory, which can then be referred back to, as you do with an audience that now hears it, and the little child will scream in terror because of the association that's been created.
Hooper, where are you?
My favorite cue in Jaws has always been that barrel chase, where the shark approaches the boat and they harpoon the animal, and he takes the line out, and the barrels lift off the boat, and the music accelerates and becomes very exciting.
Shoot! Time! What were you doing? You knew I was going to clean shot right in the head. All right, let's see how long that barrel takes to bring him up.
The boat turns to follow the shark as he's pulling the line out, and the music becomes very heroic, and there's a Korngolian fanfare, if you like, of triumph as they're going through the waves, chasing the shark.
Clean on the barrel! I'm coming around again!
Suddenly the shark dives down, the music deflates and gets slower and slower and soft. The deflation and disappointment of the realization that the shark hasn't been captured. It's all illustrated in this one area where the music is able to follow all that dramatic outline and punctuate it.
And without that score, to this day I believe the film would have only been half as successful. I think the score was clearly responsible for half the success of that movie.
Well, Jaws certainly was a hallmark in my career. It changed it very greatly. I had done, I don't know how many films, dozens I suppose, before that, and certainly hundreds of television shows. As a matter of fact, I'd even won an Academy Award before Jaws for having been music director of Fiddler on the Roof, for which I did all the arrangements and underscoring and conducting of that movie in 1970, I think it was. But Jaws for me was the first Academy Award that I received for my own music. So that was a very significant moment in my career, as it would be for anyone's.
The first test of Jaws took place, as I wrote in my own book, in Dallas, in a shopping center. And Dick Zanuck and I were extremely nervous. Would the shark get laughs? Everybody knew, read a newspaper, that it was not a real shark. What would happen? And I remember circling around that theater, and we noticed a crowd. Of course, we weren't very subtle with what was put on the marquee. It was something like The Biggest Fish Story You'll Ever See, or something very clever that attracted attention. After all, Jaws was a #1 bestseller and had a lot of media attention. And so we went and had a very stiff drink. We went into the theater, and the screams started, and they never stopped. And we were pinching each other. was incredible.
I thought the whole roof ceiling of the theater was going to collapse because the noise, the shock, and the scream was so loud, and it didn't die down, so that you couldn't literally hear the dialogue for the next, maybe minute, because people were screaming repeatedly, and there was such excitement in the theater. I remember elbowing Mr. Brown, who was sitting next to me, and he was elbowing me back, and he said, "We're in, we did it." We knew with that first scream that it had worked.
When the shark came out of the water, when Roy Scheider was chumming and said, "Why don't you come down, chum some of this shit?" The shark comes out. I had designed, hopefully, a laugh that would turn into a scream. So I used the word shit. I added that line because in those days, back in 1974, the word shit was an easy laugh. Now it's used so much nobody laughs anymore, but then it wasn't used that much. And it instantly got a nervous laugh from audiences, often an embarrassed laugh, and with younger people, kind of a rebellious laugh. And I was trying to change a laugh, ramping up into a scream, and it worked. It was my proudest moment at the whole preview. They laughed when they heard the word shit, and when the shark came out, that laugh sustained itself into a humongous scream, and popcorn went flying. And it was amazing. And it made me greedy. I got so greedy. Because earlier in the movie, when they find Ben Gardner's head in the boat, I hadn't timed it right, and Richard turns around, that's where the head's already there, and there was no reaction from the audience at all. And so I was kind of scratching my head after the preview, and I was really extraordinarily happy. The numbers were the highest numbers in Universal's history, and the executives were all happy. We were all happy. The audience loved the picture. And I was greedy. I said, there's one more scream we can get in this movie if I can figure out this thing with Ben Gardner's head. So, because the studio wouldn't give me any more money, even though they were ecstatic with it, they said, it's fine. Don't fix something that's not broken. The movie works. Don't mess with it, or you'll improve this into a failure. So I went and spent $3,000 of my own money to have some art department people build a balsa wood side of a boat to match the Ben Gardner boat we had shot before, cut a hole in it, and got the same Ben Gardner head, the styrofoam head, latex and styrofoam, and had it underwater. And this time, simply, when the double for Rick came to the hole, I did several timings. I shot it about 9 different ways. One time I shot it, he comes to the hole, and the head comes out. Another time, he comes to the hole, and the head comes out at the same time. Another time, the head comes out, and he's not even in the shot. Another time, the camera goes really close to the knife, taking the tooth out, and the head comes out there. I did it a whole bunch of different ways. And then I went to the dubbing room where we were already, remixing little changes we had made. And I cut it in, and I tried it out on all of the sound effects editors and music editors and the dubbers. And I showed them one way, and they kind of said, that's interesting, it's better than what you had. Another way, no reaction. And then one way, nobody screamed, but they all kind of just like suddenly said, oh yeah, wow, that surprised me. I didn't expect it. It was simply a matter of timing. And the moment that works the best, which is the moment in the movie that the dubbers reacted to, is the moment where he gets to the hole and then the head comes out. There's just a bit of a pause. And I just remember we then took the film to Long Beach, I think at the Lakewood theaters. And we had a second preview there with that extra scene, that extra moment in. And it got a humongous scream, bigger than the scream in Dallas when the shark came out of the water with Roy chumming. And popcorn flew even higher, and people came out of their seats even higher. And I was thrilled until at Lakewood, we got to the scene that got the previous big laugh where the shark comes out of the water when Roy's chumming. And I got a big scream, but it was only 50% or less of the scream we got in Dallas. So when that preview, which is a smash preview, the scores are higher, the studio is flying on cloud 9, that they're going to make a fortune with the movie, they keep saying. And I'm scratching my head thinking, now, what did I do to make that second scream less? And I realized it was a no-brainer. The audience didn't trust me after the first scream, at the end of the first act. And they were surprised, and then they were looking out for shadows and things coming out from behind things, and they were defensive and ready for some kind of a shock.
The rating of Jaws was a real cliffhanger. Richard Hefner, the chairman of the rating board of the Motion Picture Association of America, that tells parents what to expect on movies. It was essential from the standpoint of MCA Universal, financiers and distributors, that Jaws get a PG rating, meaning parental guidance indicated, but it meant that children could come and see it.
Whatever the ratings board said to Scheinberg and Wasserman, they told Dick and David, who came to me as my producers, and said, Stephen, in order to get not an R rating, but a PG rating, you need to cut some frames from the leg coming down. And I was happy to do it because they didn't ask me to cut the leg out. They just asked me not to let the leg hit, bounce, gush blood, settle, because I was really sort of studying it. So I cut about 1.5 to 2 feet off that shot. You just see the leg come into frame. Just when you see it severed and it just starts to hit the silt bed, we cut away.
And finally, a PG was awarded. Our argument was very simple with Hefner and his board. Nobody impersonates a shark, unlike films of violence. No one is going to go get up and eat somebody. Nobody's going to drag someone down in the water. What happens in nature is part of childhood's experience. Anyone who's read Grimm's fairy tales, Red Riding Hood, Little Red Riding Hood is one of the scariest stories ever written. And children are regularly terrified. After the film was distributed, I don't recall any letters from children about children having bad dreams. I had many about adults having bad dreams and never going by the water again. And so the rating, to the great relief of MCA Universal, was, in my estimation, rightly given. Parental guidance may be too intense for some children, was on the ads. Of course, all that did was bring them in.
I saw the film in its final version when it played at the Rivoli Theater in Manhattan, which was a huge theater with a great big screen. And the members of my family and guests were invited. And watching the audience react to it was wonderfully exciting. I mean, they just laughed and they screamed, and they did everything that we hoped they would do.
I happened by coincidence to be sitting next to the Newsweek researcher who was sitting next to the Time researcher. And at the moment when Roy turns aft and the shark comes out of the water and he utters that great line that, again, I wish I'd written, called, I think you're going to need a bigger boat. The Newsweek researcher jumped out of her chair and landed on the upturned pen of the Time researcher, thus having a double screamer going. And I thought right then we have a fairly successful movie going on here.
There was applause at the end of the movie. The movie ends, we're swimming away, it says the end, and they went crackers. Everyone went berserk. However many people are in that theater, and I couldn't even tell you, pretty big theater, they went nuts. And then they sat, and they watched all of the credits, every last one of them, and nobody moved. And then they applauded again. And I've never seen that.
And I remember walking out on the sidewalk at the end of it, and I looked at Dreyfuss, and he looked at me, and he ran over, and he jumped up in my arms, and he said, we're sensational. We're great. We're terrific. And I said, yeah.
At the end of that evening, I walked out, and I ran into Dreyfuss in the street, and we went to a bar, and all Rick could say was, he did it, he did it, he did it. And I said, who did it? What are you talking about? He said, Spielberg did it, he did it.
It was a hell of a moment. I felt so proud that I was in that movie, and so proud for Spielberg. And I remember getting on the phone with notes. I was saying, and you gotta do this, and you gotta do that. And he was very pleased.
Well, Jaws went on to become the biggest picture of all times at that time, surpassing the $100 million mark, which had never been done before. And I remember the Universal Marketing Department would take an ad out with the shark and the titles of the various pictures that had beaten us and held the records, and the shark would devour each one each week, whether it be The Godfather, whether it be The Sound of Music, whether finally Gone with the Wind, finally, until we were up on top of the surface, #1, and we became the biggest picture of all time. This was before even the foreign release of any kind. We busted right through the $100 million mark, and it was a phenomenon. It really was a phenomenon.
When a movie has the success that Jaws had, it becomes more than an entertainment. It becomes part of the popular culture, and Jaws was no exception. We had really wonderful political cartoonists like Conrad using the image of the shark as a metaphor for political behavior in Washington. We had sketches on Saturday Night Live. Chevy Chase did a great, land shark. I remember that. And John Belushi, blessed be his memory, did a fabulous impression of Dreyfus. You don't think of Belushi and Dreyfus being anywhere similar, but when Belushi put on a blue knit watch cap and said this was no boating accident, you got a laugh out of it. The first shot of Airplane by the Zucker brothers uses the shark theme, and it was a combination of elements that were all so instantly identifiable because everybody knew what they were. The shark's theme became a synonym for danger. Just all those elements just became part of popular culture.
We're off the east coast of America on the ferry from Cape Cod to Martha's Vineyard. Martha's Vineyard is a tiny island which achieved an international fame 5 years ago this summer when Senator Edward Kennedy drove his car off the bridge and into the river at Chappaquiddick. It's a tiny island, the holiday preserve of the rich from New York and from Boston. But this summer is the location for one of America's biggest motion pictures, Jaws. Based on the novel by Peter Benchley, it's the bestseller in England at the moment.
It's the story of how a killer shark marauds and threatens the lives and the livelihood of a small New England beach community. Making a feature film on dry land is a complex enough process. There seem to be at least 3 people for every job. Making a feature film at sea stops just short of a nightmare. It's the second day of American shooting on Jaws. They've already been to Australia for the underwater shots of the shark.
Turn on the walkie-talkie, please, Freddie. I don't think Freddie can listen anymore.
Freddie!
Sandar, I need to talk to you, Fred. Turn on the walkie-talkie. Stand up, we're not shooting.
All the usual panoply of assistant directors with megaphones, continuity girls, sparks and chippies are obliged to float round the action. They're still in the process of learning which side is port and which is starboard.
Guys, we can't shoot right now. Hold on. Have that belt go out and pull the anchor up and reset it off there, okay?
The film stars Roy Scheider of The French Connection and Richard Dreyfuss of American Graffiti.
The director said he faced the head of the studio and he said, I can't do it in time.
But in the age of director as superstar, the movie will probably be sold on the latest American star behind the camera, Steven Spielberg. Jaws is one of the hottest properties in the film world this year. The book was an instant hit in America, and the film rights were commensurately costly. To shoot for 13 weeks at a budget of over £1 million is something of a rarity these days, so the producers, Richard Zanuck and David Brown, must have a lot of faith in their property, and even more in their director, Mr. Spielberg, who is only 26 years old. In America, he's already provided them with a financial and critical success in Sugarland Express, which he directed. He won the award for Best Screenplay at the recent Cannes Festival. Age never seems to have daunted Mr. Spielberg. At 20, he was directing episodes of Columbo in Hollywood. At 22, he made Duel, the story of a motorist being chased by a lorry, which got rave reviews when it was eventually released here. And now Jaws. It's lunchtime, and the afternoon dialogue is being doctored a little.
No, because he'll be so energetic, and he'll be screaming and yelling, "It's a great white, it's a great white, I knew it all along." And there's only room in there for one quick line, expository line about the mate. The mate. Where's the mate is dead, we'll have to Where's the body? Why is the boat torn to pieces? Because it's a great white shark. And then all we have to do is cut out. Where are they feeding? You know, because I don't know. There have been known attacks. There's a theory called the bumping theory. And it's not a theory anymore, it's a proven fact. That sharks will nudge and bump a boat or an intended victim before they attack. Not so much in a playful manner, but in a way of testing its defenses, to see if it's going to bump back. And when it doesn't, it comes in for the kill. Kosher salami! Spielberg himself had the idea for Sugarland Express. He found it in a newspaper. It had to do with the loss of their baby, and it had to do with this media event that, you know, it just sort of sprang up all of a sudden. In Texas, there's a posse theory, and the theory is when a fellow officer is in trouble, everybody jumps into their automobiles, all the fellow officers, and they fall in behind to try to help the guy out. And the posse theory sort of is, you know, the backdrop of Sugarland Express. I was able to, within the budget of my picture, afford 40 police cars, and in real life, 90 police cars were involved in a bumper-to-bumper pursuit that was strung out over about 150 miles. I had seen Goldie in Butterflies Are Free, and there was one scene she had with Eileen Heckert in the car that I felt was, it was really, you know, heart-turning, and I knew that there was a serious actor somewhere underneath that laughing facade. She was anxious to break out of that mold and do something dramatic and do something very serious, and that's why she became a part of the, you know, the company, and that's why I hired her.
You seem to get very strong performances and naturalistic performances from your actors. What's your technique?
I don't know if it's so much of a technique. I asked the actor to, for the most part, to give me too much, so I can then take it down to a level that I feel is believable. I don't like casting actors who are low-key people. I like people with energy. So in the initial casting, I think that half of what a director does is cast his picture well, and the other half is you know, the control of the people within that. But I think half of the secret, when you do see a good picture and you like the people, it's in the casting. I like people who are outspoken and who are very large, so I can bring them down to life level. Here's that King Kong dialogue. When they run into the jungle, they're all talking. Yeah. They had like 40 extras, and everybody had 3 things to say. And they were also through the picture, they're ad-libbing. Gee, it's big. You see it coming there? Look out, Charlie! Fire now! Throw the grenades! Duck! Everybody had about 3 lines to say, and they all overlapped each other. It was terrific. They haven't made a movie like that since King Kong.
So there's a lot of what the hell's the matter? What's wrong with it? It looks like it's broken.
There's a lot of
that rear cleat's all torn up.
The scene they're taking is one early in the film, where a fisherman has gone out to try and catch the shark, but it's holed his boat and it's sunk and it's killed him. And the 2 men, the sheriff, Brody, and Hooper, the shark expert, come upon his body.
Roll sound.
It's taken pretty well all day to get this shot. Time and tide still refuse to obey the director. One of the actors has to climb from the rescue craft into the half-sunk boat. An easy enough task, you might think.
Whoa! All right. Forget it. Don't roll.
Over half an hour is wasted for dry clothes and new makeup. By then, the light is wrong, and the shot is put off till the following day. It seemed to me almost fanciful in the book that a shark could actually threaten people on a large boat. But nevertheless, this is the case, is it?
Sharks have... Here's an interesting example. When we were shooting the Australian sequences of the great white sharks, one of the great white sharks jumped into the cage boat. and sank the cage boat and sank the cages. The shark grabbed between its jaws, which can close and squeeze at 21 tons per square inch, grabbed and twisted a cage and then sounded with the cage. And when we recovered the cage, it was torn up, completely torn up.
It's not very big. It'll never hold that boat. It'll hold something.
This is my second day at sea, and I have 54 more days to go. And if I survive this, I'll have learned a lot, because right now, all I can tell you is it's twice as slow shooting at sea as it is shooting on land. Because when you set your camera for a shot, invariably the boat, which began here, is over here when you're ready to shoot. With tide and wind, and there are a lot of factors that take into consideration. You really can't hold composition, hold frame. You have to do a lot of pot shotting and shooting loose at open sea.
To pull the anchor up and reset it.
No, it doesn't come easily. I don't even think about it. If I thought about multi-million-dollar pictures and all the equipment and all the responsibility, I'd probably go bananas.
Marker. Ready, Roy?
Yeah.
Action.
Gun jam.
Okay, once again, cut it.
Save it.
Cut it. Marker. Action.
Gun doesn't fire.
Cut.
Soto.
Step out. Marker. And action.
Gun doesn't work.
Cut.
Save it.
Cut the camera.
Hey.
Marker. And action.
Ah, fuck. Please.
Step back. Action. Once again. Action.
Mr. Quint, I quit. I ain't going. Mr. Quint, I quit. I ain't going. Mr. Quint, I quit.